Have you ever found yourself one careless comment away from life or death on an alien world? Our story takes a thrilling turn when a simple joke triggers an ancient law, forcing our unsuspecting Earthling to either marry a formidable alien princess or face execution. And just when you think it can't get any more outrageous, an interstellar conspiracy group crashes the palace, determined to end his life before dawn. This high-stakes drama is packed with unexpected twists, daring rescues, quantum engineering marvels, and even a make-or-break stand-up comedy session to appease the royal court. Curious to know how it all unfolds? Stick around to discover whether our off-world hero escapes disaster or winds up at the altar in the strangest wedding ever. If you enjoy stories brimming with sci-fi excitement, heart, and humor, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us bring you more epic adventures like this one, and we promise there are plenty more intergalactic tales on the way. Now let's dive back into the action. Marcos Del Rossi slouched against the scratched metal countertop of the interstellar minnow, a dimly lit bar situated in the heart of Earth's largest spaceport slum. Flickering neon signs buzzed outside, illuminating the grime-streaked windows with hues of sickly green and electric violet. It was his birthday, a day he had once imagined celebrating on a star cruiser bound for exotic worlds, not in a rundown watering hole that reeked of stale synthale. His best friend Dean leaned beside him, already several drinks ahead in their nightly ritual of cheap liquor and desperate escapism. With a tired hand, Marcos pushed the remains of his watery beer aside and glanced longingly at the hollow screens overhead. Each display ran ads featuring luxury cruisers leaving Earth's orbit to visit distant colonies and tourist hotspots across the galaxy. "You've got to stop torturing yourself," Dean muttered, noting the longing on Marcos's face. A graphic of a high-end starliner soared across the nearest screen. Plush seats, dazzling zero-G pools, and interstellar vistas that only the wealthiest could afford. Marcos's eyes lingered on every detail, from the cruiser's sleek hull to the smiling passengers sipping cocktails in microgravity. "It's easy for you to say," Marcos replied bitterly. "You've at least been to Ganymede. I've never even stepped off planet. The only jobs I can get involve slapping logos onto energy drink cans and shipping them to the next warehouse. Refuel your cosmic journey," the labels say. "Cosmic my ass, I can barely afford rent." Dean nudged him in the ribs. "Man, you act like you've got no future. You're only turning 27, there's still time for everything." Marcos barked a laugh. "Time for what, exactly? I'm stuck in this dead-end job, counting credits so I can pay for cheap whiskey on my birthday. Meanwhile, I see these ads with folks my age or younger floating off to distant star systems as if it's just another weekend getaway. I feel like I'm running in place while the universe leaves me behind." The swirling neon ambiance flickered over Dean's concerned expression. "You know, we could try to save up together. Maybe next year we'll find some budget shuttle to—" "Save up?" Marcos cut him off. "I make a pittance, and that's if I meet my monthly quota. Energy drinks, warehouse shifts, repeated layoffs. It's a cycle. No matter how hard I grind, I'm always short. It's humiliating. I'm missing out on life, on space." Dean shook his head, gaze drifting toward a looming advertisement that bragged about the recently launched Azure Horizon, the biggest and most extravagant luxury cruiser in the system. "Just don't let it eat you up inside." "That's exactly what it's doing," Marcos muttered. The frustration in his voice was palpable. "I hear about people traveling to wondrous places, forging new destinies. Meanwhile, I'm anchored here, literally stamping fuel for the cosmos on metal cans. How ironic is that?" "All right," Dean said, his tone lightening. "If you're going to be that gloomy, we need something stronger. It's your birthday after all." He patted Marcos on the shoulder and flagged the bartender, Flynn, a burly man with tattooed arms that looked suspiciously like ex-military markings. Flynn ambled over, brows raised in silent question, and Dean leaned in conspiratorially. "Hit us with the new stuff, the top-shelf synthetic that's supposed to glow in the dark." Flynn eyed them both. "You mean Solar Surge? The one that's got the contains off-world extracts label?" "That's potent. I had a shot last week, and let's just say I spent an hour staring at the ceiling, convinced I was seeing music. Dean waggled his eyebrows at Marcos. Sounds like exactly what we need to celebrate or commiserate, whichever it is tonight. Marcos shrugged, his pessimism momentarily giving way to a flicker of reckless curiosity. Yeah, sure, why not? Let's see if it lives up to the hype. Flynn reached under the bar, extracting a crystalline bottle filled with a luminescent, sky-blue liquor. Iridescent motes swam through it like tiny galaxies adrift in a cobalt sea. He poured 2 shots, each glowing ominously in the dim light. Just remember, he warned, pushing the glasses forward, I'm not responsible for what happens if you go overboard. This drink has messed with folks' neural pathways, seeing illusions, passing out in corridors. You name it. Dean grinned, holding up a glass. To you, buddy, another year older, and hopefully one step closer to the stars. Or one step closer to broke, Marcos countered, but he clinked his shot glass against Dean's anyway. The solar surge smelled vaguely of citrus, though it had an undercurrent of something metallic, almost like ozone before a lightning storm. They tossed the shots back, and the effect was immediate. Marcos felt a warm electric buzz course through his limbs, making the dull ache of everyday life recede into the background. The bar's lights glowed brighter, and the chatter of other patrons seemed to warp, as though each laugh or expletive took on a melodious quality. Dean shook his head, blinking rapidly. Wow, I can see how folks get hooked on this. Marcos tried to speak but found his tongue thick. The environment around him was shifting, the neon lights dancing in trails that lingered at the edge of his vision. The hollow screen overhead showed images of a star cruiser departing Earth's orbit, but the vessel appeared to streak across the bar itself, leaving contrails of swirling color. You seen that? He managed to ask, though it felt like he was speaking through thick gauze. Dean's reply was lost in the throbbing music that now had a hypnotic, almost visceral pulse. The crowd around them seemed to blend into one another, forming a tapestry of swirling shapes. As reality tilted, Marcos felt the weight of gravity lessen, like a momentary flicker of zero-G, though logically he knew he was still anchored to the bar stool. Flynn smirked at them from behind the counter. I warned you two. Remember, it's meant to be sipped, not slammed. Marcos tried to focus, but the world distorted further. The last coherent image in his mind was the swirling azure glow in his shot glass, which now seemed to contain tiny supernovas bursting to life in miniature. Then everything went black, as though someone had cut the power to his consciousness. He awoke with a splitting headache and an unnerving sense that reality had shifted drastically. His cheek wasn't pressed against the sticky bar top of the interstellar minnow, but against something cool, smooth, and faintly luminescent. The surface pulsed with a gentle, rhythmic glow, as if it were alive, or at least responding to his presence. Marcos's first thought was that he'd blacked out in some VR arcade, but when he peeled his eyes open, he found himself not in a booth, but perched atop a glowing disk that floated high above an otherworldly cityscape. Towering spires of shimmering material soared upward, interconnected by footbridges of radiant light. On some walkways, he glimpsed elegantly dressed beings, their forms bearing features both humanoid and decidedly alien. Blue skin, elongated arms, swirling patterns etched into their hairless heads. Either I'm still hallucinating, he murmured groggily, or I've been abducted. Awake at last, boomed a resonant voice. Marcos turned and nearly fell off the edge of the floating platform. The voice came from an enormous statue-like figure that appeared hewn from living crystal. It stood upon a neighboring platform, arms folded, addressing a second colossal figure made entirely of roiling black mist. As I was saying, continued the crystal colossus, the entanglement of consciousness across the multiverse isn't a subject to be dismissed lightly. Nonsense, responded the misty figure, voice echoing with an eerie timbre. A relic of half-understood Earth theories from centuries ago. We have advanced far beyond that. Marcos blinked. Talking statues? Quantum debates? He pressed his palms against the glowing disk beneath him, half expecting his hands to pass through holograms. But the surface was solid, alive with soft pulses that tickled his fingertips. I need to call Dean, he muttered, fumbling for his comm device, which, to his mild surprise, was still in his jacket pocket. Before he could activate it, a new presence joined him, a floating creature resembling a lynx, but formed entirely of twinkling stars. Its translucent, shimmering body had the silhouette of a small feline, complete with tufted ears and a swishing tail of cosmic dust. "Welcome, traveler," the astral lynx purred in a voice that somehow sounded both ancient and playful. "You have arrived on Arcalia, capital world of the Celestial Dominion. I am your assigned orientation guide, designated Astro Lynx." Marco stared at it, the mental gears of logic and disbelief grinding loudly in his head. "Arcalia," he repeated. "So I'm actually in space? Another planet entirely?" The lynx floated closer, its star-dotted face unreadable. "Indeed, you traversed considerable distance in a manner that has not yet been fully explained. Our records show no official entry for you at the spaceport, nor any authorized flight path. Yet here you are." "Must have been one hell of a ride," Marco said dryly, rubbing his temples to quell the throbbing pain. "I blacked out in a bar on Earth and woke up on a hovering platform. If that's not the weirdest birthday ever, I don't know what is." The statues resumed their debate in the background, but Astro Lynx lowered its voice. "You'll find Arcalia's royal court somewhat formal. It is customary for new arrivals to appear before Emperor Jadros and his daughter, Princess Lorana." Marcos coughed. "A princess? Seriously? This is all way too surreal." The lynx rotated in midair, starlit tail flicking toward a cluster of floating walkways that curved into the distance. "Follow me, if you will. The royal court is in session, and all off-worlders must present themselves at least once." Marcos had no idea whether to protest or laugh. In the swirl of confusion, he was partially convinced he was still unconscious in some back room of the interstellar minnow, suffering a vivid chemical dream. But there was a tiny, persistent logic telling him that everything he felt, the breeze drifting between the spires, the faint vibration under his feet, the lingering headache, was far too real for a mere hallucination. "All right," he said at last. "Lead on, cosmic cat." "Lynx," the creature corrected, though to be fair, cat is not entirely inaccurate. They glided across a network of bridges, each strand of light humming beneath their steps. Marcos passed bizarre wonders, a group of towering insectoid beings in formal attire sipping drinks on a levitating terrace, bioluminescent corals that sprouted from the edges of skybound gardens, and mechanical drones with sleek metallic shells flitting overhead like oversized dragonflies. Eventually, they reached a vast edifice that looked part cathedral, part spaceship, a swirling vortex of architecture that defied Euclidean geometry. The broad entrance was flanked by guards clad in armor, seemingly spun from the same luminous thread as the walkways. Inside, the walls and ceilings stretched at impossible angles, forming a prismatic hall that shimmered with an inner glow. "The Hall of the Celestial Court," Astro Lynx announced. "Proceed with caution. Emperor Jadros takes tradition very seriously, as does his heir." Marcos gulped. "Duly noted." He was ushered forward with a small crowd of other arrivals, each as varied in species as the city outside. Some floated in anti-gravity harnesses, their aquatic physiology requiring water-filled suits. Others resembled living clouds, occasionally crackling with electricity. Marcos drew more than a few stares, presumably because humans were still a rarity in these distant galactic circles. And then he saw her, Princess Lorana. She entered the hall from an elevated portal of refracted light, flanked by two attendants. Tall and lithe, she possessed skin of a deep, shimmering lavender tone that seemed to emit faint pulses in time with her heartbeat. Her hair, or at least what Marcos assumed was hair, cascaded around her shoulders in intricate patterns, glinting like metal filaments. She wore a form-fitting gown woven from luminous strands, each thread capturing starlight and reflecting it in subtle prismatic hues. Marcos nearly tripped out over his own feet. The throng of courtiers bowed reverentially, but he just stood there, half-dazed, attempting to process how otherworldly beautiful she was. If a single word described her, it was regal. She radiated command and cool confidence, yet a flicker of restlessness flashed in her vivid silver eyes. "The princess will now hear petitions," intoned one of the guards, voice amplified by some arcane technology. "In the emperor's absence, she presides." Marco suddenly realized the crowd was nudging him forward. He wasn't ready for this. His head still buzzed from the lingering effects of the solar surge, and the sheer alien majesty of the place left him speechless. Nonetheless, the ceremonial atmosphere demanded that each new arrival pay their respects, and the line was moving quickly. He tried to recall some etiquette tips. Bow, kneel, offer a gift. Astrolinks had given him almost no instructions, and the surreality of this situation only heightened his nerves. The princess was now only a few paces away, seated on an ornate throne that looked to be made of living crystal. Courtiers and visiting dignitaries made elaborate introductions: a reptilian ambassador from the Tharsis colony, a floating orb from the Hive Mind Federation, and so on. Lorana listened with politeness, occasionally nodding or asking succinct questions. Marcos fought a mounting sense of panic. This was not how he had imagined meeting alien royalty, if he'd ever even imagined it at all. Before he had time to concoct a proper greeting, the guard's staff tapped the marble floor, signaling his turn. The princess's gaze landed on him, assessing, curious, and perhaps slightly bored, as if she'd endured countless ceremonious welcomes and was braced for yet another one. Marcos felt the eyes of every being in the hall upon him. Hi, he managed, his voice echoing uncomfortably in the hush. I'm Marcos Del Rossi, from Earth. A few scattered murmurs rippled through the crowd at the mention of Earth. Lorana arched a graceful eyebrow, her silver eyes narrowing slightly. Earth? That's a long way from here. Our records show minimal contact with your system. Marcos, still reeling, blurted, I sort of ended up here by accident. Had a bit too much to drink. An uneasy silence stretched out. Some of the courtiers looked aghast at the casual tone he was taking. The guard nearest to him stiffened, gripping his crystalline staff as though ready to escort Marcos out if he spoke one more word out of line. Finally, Lorana spoke, her voice carrying an undercurrent of amusement. An off-worlder arrives uninvited and intoxicated, then stands before me in less than a day? Remarkable. That was it. The sheer strangeness, the formal setting, the lingering high from the exotic drink, it all converged in a single catastrophic miscalculation. Marcos laughed. It came out louder than he intended, echoing across the hall. More than a few courtiers gasped, and the guard looked as if he might brain Marcos with the staff on the spot. But Marcos, lacking the filter of caution in this moment, pointed at her glowing attire. You've got to admit, princess, all of this, he waved his arm encompassing the entire glittering hall, it's more than a little over the top. I mean, luminous walkways, giant floating statues debating quantum mechanics, and you wearing starlight. If it weren't so spectacular, it'd be almost comedic. Astrolinks, perched by a pillar, tensed visibly. The princess's face became a mask of controlled outrage, her lips pressed thin, her lavender skin glowing more intensely. The murmurs rose in volume, shock and indignation mixing in the air. Lorana's voice, when she finally spoke, was dangerously calm. You find my court comedic? Marcos realized, far too late, that his casual jest might be interpreted as a grievous insult. In an Earth bar, a flippant comment like that would barely raise eyebrows. But here, this was monarchy on an interstellar scale. I didn't mean it like that, he stammered, cheeks flushing hot. All of this feels surreal to me, like a virtual reality scenario. You're so careful, one of the nearby courtiers hissed under his breath. Marcos tried desperately to salvage the situation. I mean, you look radiant. It's not an insult. He gestured helplessly, searching for words that wouldn't make it worse. Yet the moment had already slipped from his control. From behind the throne, a deep baritone resounded through the hall. You dare mock the princess of Arcalia in her own court? A hush fell across the chamber as Emperor Jadros appeared. He was taller than any of his guards by a full head, his broad shoulders encased in armor that seemed forged from compressed cosmic matter. The same lavender hue tinted his skin, but a few shades darker than Lorana's, and his eyes blazed like twin moons. He glowered at Marcos with an intensity that felt like a physical weight. I wasn't mocking, Marcos insisted weakly. I'm just an idiot who drank too much back on Earth. Sorry. Jadrus's expression remained thunderous. For centuries, Arcalia has stood as a beacon of innovation and order in this part of the galaxy. We welcome off-worlders with courtesy, yet you repay us with ridicule. In front of my daughter, no less. Lorana's gaze flicked to her father, then to Marcos. Though her posture was rigid with anger, Marcos detected the slightest flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. Perhaps she too felt that this reaction was quickly spiraling to extremes. But tradition was law, and her father was the ultimate authority. One of the courtiers stepped forward. Your Majesty, by the ancient codes, an insult to the royal family. I know the codes, the Emperor snapped, not taking his eyes off Marcos. He must face the consequences. Marcos swallowed, feeling his heart plunge into his stomach. Which are, what, exactly? Emperor Jadros's voice reverberated through the hall. The penalty for publicly insulting a member of Arcalia's royal bloodline is either death or a forced marriage to the one insulted. A collective gasp surged through the assembly. Lorana's eyes widened. Marcos felt the color drain from his face. Death or marriage? The Emperor's next words were unyielding. You have until dawn to choose. The wedding ceremony will proceed immediately if you choose to live. Otherwise, the penalty is clear. Marcos found himself flanked by guards, each clad in that strange, luminous armor. Their weapons, though elegant, crackled with lethal potential. He was trapped in a no-win scenario. Lorana rose from her seat, her expression appalled yet conflicted. Father, this is absurd, she began, but Jadros silenced her with a raised hand. The law is the law, daughter. We cannot be seen to waver. This off-worlder may decide his own fate. Time seemed to slow as the guards closed in around Marcos. He watched the princess's horrified expression, the emperor's stern visage, and the wary gazes of the courtiers. Numb shock washed over him. In a matter of minutes, he had tumbled from disoriented traveler to convict, staring down a sentence that might force him into an alien marriage, or end his life. This can't be real, he muttered under his breath. But the sight of the guards' crackling weapons convinced him otherwise. He'd never had the best self-preservation instincts, but the survival reflex was kicking in now. One of the guards prodded him forward. You will wait in the preparation chambers until dawn. His tone, though formal, contained a note of sympathy. Clearly, even they found this to be an extreme response. Marcos's gaze flicked over to Lorana. Their eyes met for a brief instant, and in that moment, he glimpsed something that transcended her anger. Perhaps pity, or even a shred of curiosity about the man who had stumbled so foolishly into her domain. She said nothing, however. Tradition, it seemed, bound her tongue as much as it bound his fate. He tried one last appeal. I apologize for my words. I truly didn't intend to offend. But Emperor Jadros raised a hand again. Enough, the dawn will bring your choice. All around them, the courtiers whispered among themselves, a swirl of fancy robes and hushed voices. Marcos felt his arms clamped in the guard's firm grip, pulling him away from the dais. Astrolynx hovered at the periphery of the crowd, its star-speckled form flickering with dismay. It gave Marcos a mournful shake of its translucent head, as if to say, I tried to warn you. Before Marcos could blink, he was escorted through a labyrinth of corridors, each lined with the reflective surfaces that bent light in mesmerizing ways. The air felt charged, as though the entire palace was alive with pulsing energy. He stumbled along in a daze, hearing only the echo of his own heartbeat reverberating in his ears. At last, they arrived in a chamber ringed with shimmering walls. A force field glowed across the single window, giving a panoramic view of Arcalia's night sky. Vast streams of starships and floating platforms traversed the horizon, while shimmering city towers extended into distant clouds. It was simultaneously beautiful and terrifying, a prison with a spectacular view. One guard input a series of commands on a crystalline panel, and the door behind Marcos sealed shut with a nearly inaudible click, then silence. He was alone, facing the unimaginable truth of a bizarre alien law. By dawn, he must choose to marry Princess Lorana, or die. He sank to the chamber's gleaming floor, reality crashing in. Happy birthday to me, he muttered, pressing his head into his hands. Outside, the alien city glowed on, uncaring, as though mocking the Earthman who had inadvertently insulted a princess and triggered an ancient penalty he never knew existed. Marcos Del Rossi sat on the gleaming floor of the preparation chamber, shoulders hunched in the silent dread as the gravity of his situation bore down on him. A force-field window revealed the breathtaking vista of Arcalia's skyscape, bridges of living light crisscrossing a city of suspended spires, each tower a testament to technology and artistry that surpassed anything he had ever witnessed on Earth. For a few moments, he almost forgot the predicament he was in, transfixed by the beauty of distant ships drifting through violet-hued clouds. Then the Emperor's ultimatum echoed in his mind: marriage to Princess Lorana by dawn, or execution. He rose unsteadily to his feet, heart thundering in his chest, and tested the invisible barrier that separated him from the open air. When he pressed a palm to the window, it responded with a soft hum, the force field rippling like disturbed water. There would be no easy way out. He wasn't about to fling himself from a high tower on some wild chance of survival. Besides, even if he escaped, he had nowhere to go. And Arcalia's sprawling sky cityscape would be an immediate tip-off that a rogue off-worlder was running loose. As if responding to his anxiety, a glow at the rear of the chamber drew his attention. A small, swirling phenomenon, like a vertical puddle of starlight, materialized in midair. From its center stepped Astro Lynx, its luminous ears perked in concern. The sight of the creature was both comforting and alarming. Marcos let out a shaky breath. "I was wondering if you'd return," he said, voice hoarse with tension. Astrolynx regarded him with that uncanny feline inscrutability. "I apologize for not warning you more thoroughly," it said, tone tinged with regret. "Arcalian custom is complex, and I did not foresee you would speak so casually." Marcos gave a half-laugh, half-sigh. "Sure, blame me for having a sense of humor under duress, but I didn't mean to offend the princess." "Offense or no offense, you have triggered one of our oldest laws," Astrolynx replied, floating closer. "It was primarily designed to deter frivolous insults against the throne. The notion was that nobody would risk such a dire punishment. Apparently, they did not account for someone like you." His cheeks warmed at the implication. "So I'm either going to or marry Princess Lorana, and she's not exactly thrilled about that, right?" The star-flecked lynx shook its head, astral tail flicking in a gesture of sympathy. "Her Highness finds this law outdated, but her father enforces tradition with fervor. Emperor Gyros believes deviating from these codes would invite rebellion or weaken his authority. Arcalia's stability in his eyes hangs on the unbroken observance of each royal edict." Marcos paced the chamber, his reflection splintered across the crystalline floor. "Listen, is there any chance I can just formally apologize and skip the whole marriage or death scenario? Maybe pay a fine or something?" Astrolynx's luminous eyes glimmered with a melancholy light. "The ancient code allows no such alternative. However, there is someone else who might help you find a loophole, if one exists. She is not in favor of your execution, nor is she pleased about being forced into marriage herself." Marcus's breath caught. "Princess Lorana." At that exact moment, the chamber door slid open with a whisper of displaced air. In the threshold stood the princess, no longer in her resplendent starlit gown, but in a form-fitting jumpsuit made of some opalescent material. Her regal presence remained unmistakable. Her posture was poised, and she looked more than capable of commanding a room, no matter the attire. Without preamble, she dismissed Astrolynx with a curt nod, and the feline guide evaporated into motes of cosmic dust, leaving the two of them alone in tense silence. The hush between them was thick with conflicted emotion. Marcos straightened, still mindful that he stood in the presence of royalty, even if she had just banished his one confidant in this alien realm. Princess Lorana took a single step into the chamber, each motion charged with that effortless grace he had witnessed in the throne room. The violet glow of her skin seemed slightly dimmer than before, as though some internal stress had drained her luminescence. Her silver eyes flicked over him, impassive. "My father's decree stands," she said, voice echoing with a musical cadence that belied her frustration. "I cannot stop it. At dawn, you must choose. Accept the marriage or be put to death. There is no middle path." Marcos tried to swallow the lump in his throat. "That's pretty grim." but I guess you already know that. Listen, for what it's worth, I truly am sorry. I meant no disrespect. I'm just a fool who speaks without thinking, Lorana finished, arching one regal eyebrow. He could have quibbled, but honestly it was a fair assessment. Instead he shrugged, palms open. Yes, exactly. I'm a nobody from Earth who was in way over his head the second he woke up here. I made a bad joke at the worst possible time. She studied him for a moment, something like curiosity flickering in her eyes. Your insolence was unexpected. Most who stand in my court adopt excessive deference. I'm not accustomed to genuine opinions. He hesitated. I wouldn't call it insolence. On Earth, we have a more casual way of talking to authority figures. Sometimes we call our leaders by first names, even tease them in good fun. I never imagined I'd be penalized with a wedding or execution for a few poorly chosen words. That is the law, she said flatly, yet her taut jaw hinted at how she felt about that law. She turned slightly, inspecting the shimmering walls of the chamber as if searching for hidden ears. Satisfied they were alone, she drew closer, voice subdued. You must realize I do not wish this marriage any more than you do. My life is governed by political alliances. A royal wedding is never just a celebration. It's a bargaining chip, a promise to unify factions. My father has arranged my future for years, intending to secure an alliance with a powerful family in the neighboring system. Now, with your arrival and the spectacle you created, he's bound by Arcalian tradition to uphold the old code. Marcos inhaled slowly. He seemed pretty upset by my presence, but if he's so concerned with alliances, why not just ignore my insult and let me go? She grimaced, because the entire court witnessed it. To ignore the insult would be to show leniency where tradition demands punishment. My father believes compromise is a slippery slope to instability. He relies on the code's severity to maintain order, even if it means forcing me into a politically worthless marriage with a man who just materialized in our city. Her words stung, although he could hardly blame her. Politically worthless, Marcos repeated under his breath, trying not to sound hurt. Look, I may be worthless in terms of cosmic hierarchy, but I'm not exactly eager to die. If you feel the same way, maybe we can figure something out. A hidden clause? A special dispensation? Anything. Lorana eyed him carefully, and for a moment the flicker in her eyes suggested she might be weighing the possibility. Then her shoulders fell in resignation. Arcalian law is unyielding. However, she added, the ghost of a smile tugging at her lips, there may be certain creative ways to interpret tradition. I cannot promise success, but if we work together, perhaps we can avert a tragedy. Unsure whether he should feel relieved or terrified, Marcos followed the princess out of the preparation chamber. The guards stationed in the corridor snapped to attention at her presence. Their armor glowed faintly, responding to Lorana's regal aura. With a slight nod, she directed them to stand aside. Clearly, she had influence enough to secure them a measure of privacy, even within the labyrinth of palace corridors. They walked in silence at first, passing architectural wonders that would have seemed impossible on Earth. Sections of the hallway curved and then vanished entirely, replaced by shimmering illusions that opened onto suspended walkways. Occasionally, they had to step through translucent partitions that reconfigured themselves once they had passed, as if each corridor was both a physical space and a dynamic energy field. Marco stole glances at Lorana, who carried herself with a mix of tension and determination. If she felt at all conflicted about working secretly with an off-worlder, she hid it well. Her stoic expression betrayed little save the faint luminescent pulse along her jawline that might have indicated stress or hurried thought. Meanwhile, Marcos's own nerves buzzed like a nest of insects. He was painfully aware that one misstep could land him in an Arcalian dungeon, or worse. At length, Lorana halted before a set of double doors etched with swirling patterns. My private laboratory, she announced quietly. No one enters without my permission, not even the guards. Inside, we can speak freely. A small scanner glowed near the door's center. She pressed her palm against it, and the doors parted with a gentle sigh. Marcos followed her into what could only be described as an engineer's playground meets a cosmic atelier. Holographic diagrams flickered in midair, rotating with meticulous detail. Schematics for sleek starships, shimmering plasma rifles, and strange devices that appeared half alive filled the space. Workbenches bristled with tools forged from advanced materials. Some looked like scalpels made of light, others like wrenches designed to manipulate quantum fields. "I didn't realize you were a scientist," Marcos said, gawking at the half-constructed drones floating in a zero-G field in one corner of the room. "A tinkerer of sorts," Lorena replied, a note of pride creeping into her voice. "My father prefers that I master court etiquette, trade negotiations, and diplomatic ceremonies. But this," she gestured to the wealth of devices and prototypes, "is where I feel most true to myself. I study engineering, quantum mechanics, and advanced propulsion whenever I can slip away from my duties." Marcos let out a low whistle. "You're an actual genius. Not just a princess locked in a tower, but a brilliant mind-building, who knows what. This is incredible." A faint smile lifted the edges of her lips. "Not everyone in the palace approves. Many consider it improper for a royal heir to engage in hands-on creation. They expect me to remain above such things." The flicker of resentment in her eyes reminded Marcos of the fierce independence she had shown in their brief interactions. It struck him that maybe she was as trapped by her own station as he was by this insane predicament. "So how do these inventions help us deal with the marriage ultimatum?" She led him to a central console where a holographic screen displayed swirling equations and schematics. "They might not, but knowledge is power. If there's any obscure legal or historical precedent to exploit, it would be archived in the palace's restricted data vaults. And if there isn't, I can still develop other exit strategies." Her slender fingers danced over a control interface which glowed in response to her biometric signature. "We have less than a cycle. Arcalia's dawn comes quickly." The princess dove into her research, pulling up ancient tomes digitized into hypercrystal archives. Marcos watched in fascination as lines of alien scripts scrolled across the holographic display. Occasionally she paused, scanning passages in a fluid, practiced manner, muttering to herself about how certain bylaws had changed over centuries of Arcalian governance. While she read, Marcus wandered between various prototypes. One contraption resembled a sleek, chair-like apparatus surrounded by cylindrical rods, each inscribed with swirling runes. Another looked like an insectile robot with delicate mechanical limbs folded neatly under a carapace of shimmering alloy. He couldn't make heads or tails of most of them, but it was clear that Lorana's intellect was formidable. As minutes stretched into an hour, he peered over her shoulder. "Anything helpful?" he ventured softly, not wanting to break her concentration. She leaned back, rubbing her temples. "I found references to an amendment from 400 years ago after an incident involving a rogue warlord who insulted the reigning monarch. It's quite outdated, but it states that if the princess, i.e. me, were to willingly release the insulted status in a formal declaration, the penalty might be suspended. However, that practice was later superseded by stricter codes. My father would never allow the older amendment to override the current law." Marcos deflated. "So that's a dead end." For the moment, Lorana's eyes gleamed with renewed defiance. "If we could demonstrate that your so-called insult was in fact part of a recognized cultural custom on your home planet, we might force my father to reconsider. The code only applies when there is indisputable evidence of disrespect within the context of Arcalian customs." Marco scratched the back of his neck. "So basically, if I can prove that joking around with royalty is normal for humans, it might cast doubt on whether I insulted you within the bounds of Arcalian tradition?" She nodded. "Precisely, but we'll need official Earth documentation or testimony, and we must gather it before dawn. Do you have any means of contacting your planet quickly?" His eyes widened. "My comm device. I still have it in my jacket pocket." He patted his clothes, retrieving the small rectangular gadget. It looked comically primitive in comparison to Arcalian technology, but it was connected to Earth's quantum relay network, at least in theory. "If there's a relay station or universal data grid here, I might reach a friend back home. Possibly Dean, my best friend, who's probably worried sick." Before Lorana could respond, a sudden shriek of alarms pierced the lab. Panels on the walls flashed crimson, and overhead lights flickered ominously. Lorana leapt to her feet, drawing a handheld device from a belt at her waist. Marcos recognized it as some sort of energy-based weapon. Security breach, she hissed, glancing at the swirling red holographic icons. An unauthorized group just entered the corridor outside the lab. They must have bypassed the guards or taken them out silently. Marcos's heart hammered in his chest. Who would do that? The Emperor's security detail should be impenetrable, she replied. This has to be a targeted strike. They both spun toward the lab doors as they slid open, revealing a trio of shadowy figures armed with sleek black rifles that gave off a menacing hum. For a split second, nobody moved, and Marcos found himself confronting the deadly reality that his situation had just become exponentially more dangerous. Princess Lorana, hissed one of the intruders, a tall, lithe figure swathed in dark fabric that shimmered like living ink. We have no quarrel with you. Hand over the off-worlder, and we'll depart without harm. Marcos felt a jolt of adrenaline. Whoever these assailants were, they clearly had a specific target, him. But Lirana moved before he could even blink. She fired a shot from her handheld weapon, a precise beam of crackling violet energy that struck one intruder's weapon, disarming them in a burst of sparks. The intruder yelped and leapt backward, but Lirana pressed forward, pivoting gracefully behind a console for cover. The other two assailants fanned out. One fired a short burst of sizzling bolts that ricocheted off the lab's protective shielding, leaving glowing scorch marks on a nearby workbench. Marcos dove for cover behind the strange insectile robot he'd seen earlier, which provided partial shelter. His heart pounded so hard he was sure they could hear it. Amid the chaos, Lirana barked a command to him over the whine of energy weapons. Get behind the resonance shield generator. Over there! She pointed toward a squat device near the far wall, a cylinder sporting a shimmering plasma coil on top. Marcos scrambled in that direction, narrowly dodging a bolt that sizzled past his shoulder. The cylinder was about waist-high, and as soon as he crouched next to it, he felt a protective aura manifest, like a thin dome of refracted light that curved around him. Shots that struck it dissipated in crackling arcs, leaving him miraculously unscathed. One intruder shouted, "Princess, we're under orders to eliminate the Earthman. The Shadow Crest Alliance demands it. No forced marriage will unify your empire with an outsider." Lorana's reply was another precision shot, grazing the speaker's shoulder. They staggered, cursing in an alien tongue. "Nobody asked for your demands," she snarled, her voice echoing with the fury of someone who'd endured countless political constraints. "You think murdering an off-worlder in my own laboratory will advance your cause?" For a moment, the tension spiked. The intruders seemed uncertain about pressing their attack against an armed and highly motivated princess. Then the one whose rifle had been destroyed lunged at Lorana with a short blade that crackled with energy. She pivoted, parrying with surprising martial skill, and slammed the attacker's wrist against a console. The blade clattered to the floor. Marcos realized he could not merely cower behind the shield. Spotting a stray piece of equipment, a cylindrical tool with a glowing tip, he grabbed it, hoping it could serve as an improvised weapon. He jumped from behind the generator, surprising one of the intruders who had been circling around to flank Lorana. With an awkward swing, Marcos struck the attacker's helmet, sending sparks flying. It was enough to disorient them, allowing Lorana to blast them with a stun beam. In seconds, two of the intruders were either unconscious or incapacitated. The last one, outnumbered, spun toward the door. Lorana took aim, but the figure managed to toss a small disc on the floor, and in a flash of swirling black energy, they vanished, likely a teleportation device of some kind. Panting, Lorana surveyed the aftermath. Two unconscious attackers, flickering lab lights, and a half-singed console panel. Marcos exhaled in relief. "Please tell me this is not a normal day for you." She shot him a wry look, holstering her weapon. "Not entirely normal, but Arcalia has its share of intrigues. Now we know one thing for certain. If our enemies want you dead this badly, there must be more than just tradition at stake." Alarms continued to wail in the distance. Lorana rushed to a control station and deactivated them with a curt command, overriding standard security responses before the entire palace descended on her lab. She tapped a series of glyphs that dispatched a silent alert to her personal guard contingent, specifying that only soldiers loyal to her direct authority should respond. Marcos stood beside one of the subdued attackers, eyeing the intricately woven black suit that glimmered faintly. Shadowcrest Alliance, he repeated, recalling the phrase the assailant had used. Any idea who they are? Lorana glared at the unconscious figure. They're a hostile faction within the Dominion, well-connected, well-funded, and staunchly opposed to opening our borders or forging alliances outside our region. They fear that incorporating other worlds, like Earth, might diminish their influence. My father believes they've been behind several sabotage attempts, though we never had solid proof until now. She paused, glancing at Marcos. Apparently the news of your forced marriage has already reached their ears and they're determined to stop it. He frowned. Because they think my marriage to you represents some dangerous alliance that undermines their power? Likely. Or they simply view the situation as an opportunity to incite chaos. They might even hope that if you were killed on palace grounds, it'd lead to interstellar scandal. My father's rule would be questioned, and the empire would be weakened. She eyed him seriously. You've unwittingly become a lightning rod for political conflict. Marco shifted uncomfortably. Lucky me. Two of Lorana's personal guards arrived, tall figures in platinum-toned armor with slender visors. They saluted the princess, then promptly secured the unconscious intruders, binding them with glowing restraints. Lorana ordered them to remain discreet, to which they responded with practiced solemnity. The guards dragged the intruders out, promising to hand them over to a loyal security unit for interrogation. The lab finally settled into an uneasy calm. So, Marcos ventured, leaning against a half-assembled drone, did you see how I clocked that one guy with whatever this is? He held up the cylindrical tool with a slightly sheepish grin. Lorana allowed a faint smile. A resonance welder, used for precision microconstruction. I suppose it doubles as a makeshift club. Desperate times, he said, shrugging. Adrenaline still coursed through his veins, and now that immediate danger had passed, he found himself trembling. Lorana didn't look entirely unshaken either, though she masked it well. Are you okay? He asked softly. I'm fine, she replied, though her radiant skin pulsed a shade lighter. She ran a hand over her hair, which had loosened during the fight. This changes things. If the Shadowcrest Alliance is making moves now, my father will double down on the law, refusing any compromise. He'll see it as a necessary show of strength to crush internal dissent. That means he'll be even more adamant about enforcing your penalty. Meaning the choice at dawn is still locked in place, Marcos murmured. He looked at the comm device in his hand. We should try contacting Earth. If the only hope is to prove that my insult wasn't truly an insult by Arcalian standards, then maybe I can get someone from my world to vouch for our casual style of banter. Lorana nodded. Agreed. Plug that device into the port over there. She indicated an input slot near the main console. If it's even partially compatible with our data streams, I can amplify the signal through Arcalia's quantum lattice. Marcos did as instructed, fiddling with the adapter until the small screen on his comm lit up, showing only static at first. Then, with a burst of digital noise, it displayed a faint signal icon. His heart skipped a beat. If he could just reach Dean. The screen flickered, and a familiar face materialized, though hazy and with latency. Dean's wide eyes and disheveled hair filled the tiny frame. Marcos? Holy, where the hell have you been? Relief flooded Marcos as he heard his friend's frantic voice crackling through the comm. He realized how surreal it was to have this conversation while standing inside an advanced alien laboratory, with a brilliant princess at his side and the lingering odor of burnt electronics in the air from the recent firefight. Dean, you have no idea how glad I am to see you. Are you okay? Dean looked both relieved and panicked. Behind him, Marcos could make out the vaguely familiar surroundings of the interstellar minnow, the same neon-lit bar where the nightmarish adventure had started. Some of the bar patrons milled around in the background, casting curious glances. Me, dude, I'm at the minnow trying to sober up. We've been worried sick, man. Last I saw, you were hammered and then things got weird. The next thing I know, no one's seen you. Then some rumors started about a stowaway on a star cruiser. Marcos grimaced. Long story, but yes, that's basically what happened. Our buddy group pulled some drunken stunt that landed me on an interstellar cruise without proper clearance. Then, well, I ended up here, on Arcalia. It's complicated. Dean cursed under his breath. I can't believe that actually happened. Look, are you safe? Is this some kidnapping ring? Not exactly. Marco shot Lirana an awkward glance. I sort of insulted an alien princess by mistake. Yes, you heard that right. And now there's a law that says I have to marry her or face execution at dawn. Also, there might be a conspiracy wanting me dead to destabilize the Empire. Dean's jaw dropped, and for a moment the only sound from his feed was the crackle of poor reception. That sounds like the plot of a cheesy sci-fi romance, man. And you're the main character. Marco snorted, though the humor was swallowed by the weight of the situation. Yeah, well, it's painfully real. Listen, we need proof, something that shows casual joking and jabs are common on Earth, even toward figures of authority. Like cultural examples, official statements. We need to demonstrate that my so-called insult wasn't intended as disrespect by human norms. Dean looked skeptical. Official statements, cultural documents, I can't just snap my fingers and produce them. Princess Lirana stepped forward, crossing her arms in a poised but urgent posture. Pardon me for interrupting, but we have very little time. The off-worlder's entire fate depends on this. You must gather any recorded evidence that Earth's leaders, celebrities, or culturally significant figures are often addressed humorously without legal consequences. Dean's eyes flicked over to Lirana, who was visible in the video feed. He blinked twice, clearly astonished at the sight of a tall, regal, lavender-skinned woman with silver eyes speaking perfect English. This is incredible, he breathed, momentarily forgetting the urgency. But yes, I'll do what I can. I might find comedic roasts of presidents, journalists calling out monarch, that kind of thing. It'll be late on Earth, but I'll ask around, search the net, try to compile a file or something that might pass as legal or cultural evidence. Marcos gave him a tight smile. Thank you, man. This might be a literal lifesaver. As the line crackled, Dean's expression became serious. Hang in there, buddy, and Your Highness, please don't let them behead my friend before I can piece this together. Lirana nodded. I will do everything in my power. The feed sputtered, then went dark. Marcos exhaled, placing the comm device gently on the console. He turned to Lirana with a mix of hope and dread. It's a long shot, but at least we have a plan. She glanced at the window overlooking the darkening sky, her features tense. Dawn comes soon. We'll need more than a plan. We'll need a miracle. Night in Arcalia was no serene affair for Marcos Del Rossi. Time pressed down on him as though the planet's gravity had unexpectedly doubled. In the privacy of Princess Lirana's laboratory, he paced while she continued scanning the digital scrolls and ancient statutes, hoping for any detail that might strengthen their case. The recent assassination attempt had stiffened the Emperor's resolve, but ironically it also gave them a potential angle to argue for leniency. If they could show that the Shadowcrest Alliance was weaponizing the forced marriage for political gain, perhaps Emperor Jaros would be willing to see reason, anything to avoid giving them an even bigger pretext to sow chaos. They had to work fast. Dawn on Arcalia was only a few hours away, and every second that ticked by threatened to seal Marcos's fate. If Dean managed to compile enough Earth data, clips of comedians roasting presidents, official statements from cultural experts, news broadcasts showing casual banter between leaders, then Lirana could present an argument that his insult was lost in cross-cultural translation. With luck, the Emperor would consider a reprieve. Lirana, for her part, was no less anxious. Marcos could see tension in the tight set of her shoulders and in the uncharacteristically quick flutter of her luminous eyelashes whenever she paused to read. More than once she muttered something about how archaic their legal code had become. It was written centuries ago to discourage pointless barbs against the throne, she said, scanning a luminous tablet. But we've evolved in many ways. We trade with dozens of species, exchange technology with entire consortiums. The idea that a jest can lead to marriage or death is an outdated relic. Yet here we are. Marcos hesitated, heart pounding. What if your father won't budge? What if the dawn arrives and we have no proof or no convincing argument? She looked up from the screen, her silver eyes reflecting the swirling lines of alien text. I'm not letting them kill you, she said firmly. Worst comes to worst, you'll have to go through with the wedding ceremony, at least long enough to spare your life. His stomach did a somersault. Despite the dire circumstances, he couldn't help thinking about how extraordinary Lorana was. Brilliant, brave, regal, and also caught in the machinations of an empire she served but didn't always agree with. The notion of wedding her under these conditions left him with deeply mixed emotions. Could a union forced by law and political pressures be anything but doomed? And yet, when he looked at her, he felt an undeniable pull, admiration, curiosity, and even the first spark of something deeper. As though sensing his thoughts, Lorana lowered the tablet. If we marry just to avoid execution, the entire court will watch our every move. My father will expect me to keep you on a short leash, and the Shadowcrest Alliance will keep trying to sabotage or assassinate you. That's no life for anyone. Marcos managed a crooked smile. Appreciate that you don't want me dead, and for what it's worth, I'd rather not drag you into a sham marriage. Her gaze was steady, the faint glow under her skin pulsing with the tempo of her heartbeat. Then let's pray Dean finds what we need. I'll do my part to bolster the argument, but our time is running out. At that moment, the communications device beeped. The scrambled feed crackled to life, revealing Dean again. This time he appeared in a cramped storeroom, possibly somewhere in the back of the interstellar minnow. He was juggling 2 data tablets and looked harried, but determined. Marcos, Princess, I've got some stuff. Not sure if it'll be enough, but I tried. Let me send the files. Dean's data transfer arrived in bursts of static-laden packets. Snippets of Earth culture emerged on Lorana's console. Late-night show monologues mocking heads of state, comedic routines lampooning royalty from centuries past, satirical cartoons depicting world leaders in everything from clown shoes to donkey ears. Also included were serious analyses from anthropologists explaining how humor functioned in Earth societies. A social equalizer, a form of critique, even a tool of bonding. Marcos watched Lorana's face as she skimmed through it, her expression shifting from curiosity to cautious optimism. This might actually help, she murmured, turning one of the tablets so Marcos could see. Dean had included a short documentary about historical figures, including Earth's ancient monarchies, where gestures were officially sanctioned to mock the king and queen within certain boundaries. It's evidence that on Earth, humor toward authority isn't automatically disrespectful. It can even be revered as part of cultural tradition. She quickly cross-referenced the files with Arcalian data archives. We'll need to demonstrate that your comment in the throne room originated from a comedic impulse rather than genuine derision. Her voice held a hopeful edge. My father is strict, but he's also a scholar. If we present this in the right way, he might at least grant a delay of the sentencing. With more time, we can push for a full dismissal of the punishment. Marcos nodded, relief mingling with apprehension. So we present it as an official petition to reconsider the law based on cross-cultural norms? She paused, tapping her chin thoughtfully. Yes, but we'll need a compelling performance. You'll have to address the court yourself, prove that your sense of humor is genuine, not malicious. He winced. Public speaking in front of an alien monarchy that might still want his head? Not exactly a comforting idea, but if the alternative was execution or a coerced marriage, well, he'd figure out a way. Okay, he said, trying to steady his breath. I'll do my best. As they finalized the plan, a soft chime announced someone at the lab door. Lorana tensed, placing a hand on her sidearm. With a cautious gesture, she activated the door's viewing panel to reveal Astro Lynx, its star-spangled form flickering urgently. She granted it entry, and the feline projection slipped inside. Princess, Astro Lynx said in a hushed tone, the Emperor has declared an early convening of the royal court. Dawn may arrive sooner than expected. He's adjusting the palace's day cycle to address the unrest after the recent security breach. Marcos felt a chill. He can just change the time of day? The lynx flicked its cosmic tail. Arcalia's environment is regulated by advanced atmospheric filters, tinted force fields, and artificial sunlight reflectors orbiting the city. While not altering the planet's actual rotation, the Emperor can mimic dawn or dusk to accommodate certain ceremonial events. That means we're out of time, Lorana said briskly. She handed Marcos a small device resembling an earpiece. Upload Dean's file onto this translator node. When you speak, it will project relevant cultural data to the court in real time. Marcos could feel his heart hammer in his chest. He looked at Lorana, half expecting her to say something reassuring, but her gaze was already steeled. Marcos, if my father senses weakness or dishonesty, he'll enforce the penalty without mercy. You have one chance to convince him that our laws should not apply in this case. Taking a deep breath, Marcos pocketed the translator node. No pressure, he muttered, forcing a brave smirk. Let's go save my life. They emerged into a corridor filled with tension. Word had spread of the Shadow Crest infiltration, setting every guard on edge. Lorana's status as heir to the throne granted them safe passage through checkpoints, but the hush among the palace staff hinted at widespread unease. More than once, Marcos overheard muttered references to wedding fiasco and foreigners stirring trouble, though when courtiers and guards noticed Lorana's approach, they clammed up immediately. They finally reached the main concourse leading to the throne room, a vast hall flanked by towering columns of translucent crystal. Echoing footsteps merged with the hushed buzz of anticipation. The dais ahead shimmered under an early sunrise effect, courtesy of the Emperor's atmospheric controls. Marcos's pulse quickened. It felt like heading toward a final showdown, except his weapon was a meager compilation of Earth comedy and cultural norms. The Emperor sat on a high throne, formed of the same living crystal that permeated Arcalia's architecture. Ornate carvings glowed at his back, giving him an almost mythic presence. A cadre of officials and guards fanned out to either side, their expressions hard to read under the refracted lights. Near the foot of the throne, a dais had been prepared, likely for Marcos, the condemned, or perhaps the bridegroom-to-be. His throat tightened at the realization that the two roles were one and the same. Lorana walked ahead to her father, bowing stiffly. "Father," she announced, voice echoing in the hush. "You have called the court together earlier than expected." Emperor Jadros rose, his deep lavender skin reflecting dawn's simulated glow. "Recent events demand swift resolution, daughter," he intoned, his voice resonant. "The infiltration by traitors has cast a shadow on this palace. We must reaffirm our laws, particularly those laws that uphold respect for the throne." A wave of ominous murmuring swept through the assembled courtiers. Marcos noticed a handful of aristocrats from other Arcalian provinces, each wearing subtly different styles of regalia. Likely here to witness the outcome, they looked on with stoic interest. If the emperor intended to make an example of him, he had a full audience. Marcos stepped forward, adrenaline surging. The guard to his left placed a hand on his shoulder, as if to restrain him, but a slight nod from Lorana bade the guard release him. He stood before the emperor, trying not to tremble under the weight of so many stares. "Marcos del Rossi," boomed the emperor, "you are charged with insulting the royal family in public, inciting scandal, and bringing disrespect to Arcalian traditions. By law, you must marry Princess Lorana or face execution. The time for your choice is upon us." Marcos activated the translator node hidden in his ear. He felt a faint hum, indicating it was ready to project cultural data if prompted. Summoning his courage, he lifted his chin and forced himself to address the emperor calmly. "Your Majesty, I ask for permission to speak in my own defense. If, after hearing me, you still deem me guilty, I will accept your verdict." A ripple of surprise passed through the court. Perhaps they expected him to beg or grovel. Emperor Jadros's stare was cold, but he gave a curt nod. "Say what you will, off-worlder, but do not waste our time." Marcos swallowed hard, feeling as though the entirety of Earth's comedic tradition teetered on the tip of his tongue. "Your Majesty, people of Arcalia," he began, voice quavering slightly, "allow me to explain how humor functions on my homeworld. In Earth culture, teasing or joking, even about those in power, doesn't always imply malice. Often it's a form of camaraderie, a way to acknowledge shared humanity. It's part of how we connect." To bolster his words, Marcos tapped the translator node, sending the first data packet to a projection panel in the throne room. Instantly, holographic images materialized in midair for all to see. Snippets of Earth comedy shows, roasts of political figures, comedic sketches featuring world leaders as caricatures. He felt a wave of self-consciousness at how silly some of it must appear in a grand alien court. One clip showed a late-night comedian impersonating a president's speech, complete with exaggerated gestures and a mocking tone. Gasps and murmurs rippled among the Arcalians. A few recognized the format as performance art, but many seemed shocked that Earth society allowed such unflattering portrayals of authority figures. Marcos pressed on, voice gaining steadiness as he sensed their intrigue. On Earth, respect isn't always communicated by strict protocol. Sometimes humor can mean inclusion. It says, we're all human, we all share the absurdities of life. My so-called insult to Princess Lorana was a misguided attempt at humor under stress and confusion, not a calculated affront to her dignity. He paused, reading the crowd's expressions. Some wore deep frowns, others looked perplexed, but not entirely dismissive. Lorana stood off to the side, arms folded, listening with rapt attention. Emperor Hydros's face was stone, yet his eyes flicked to the projection screens, studying the comedic vignettes with an inscrutable intensity. Marcos inhaled, nerves jangling. Your Majesty, I propose that the ancient law was designed to punish deliberate, contemptuous insults in line with Arcalian norms. What I did was speak in a casual, irreverent manner typical of Earth culture. I never aimed to undermine your throne. If anything, I was enthralled by your city's wonders and overwhelmed by the princess's magnificence. He forced a small chuckle, mostly to ease his own tension. Sometimes people laugh when they're frightened or unsure. That's all it was, a reflex, not an act of rebellion. And at that, the translator node kicked into another data stream, an anthropologist's commentary on laughter as a universal coping mechanism. Marcos had no idea if these academic references would mean anything to the Emperor, but he hoped to demonstrate that Earth's brand of humor was more than just disrespect. When the final hologram blinked out, a hush settled. Emperor Jadros rose slowly, the luminous crystal of his throne reflecting jagged shapes across his imposing frame. He surveyed the silent courtiers, then fixed Marcos with a probing look. You claim your laughter was a manifestation of awe and confusion, not mockery. That you come from a society where jesting with authority is not necessarily a breach of respect. Marcos swallowed. Yes, Your Majesty. Some might say that's a convenient excuse, the Emperor rumbled, stepping down from the dais. He moved within a few paces of Marcos. The tension in the air thickened. Yet, I can hardly discount the variety of evidence you've shown. Nor can I ignore my daughter's testimony that you attempted to protect her when the palace was attacked. He paused, glancing briefly at Lorana. And that you have cooperated in every step of this fiasco, despite your confusion. Lorana stepped forward, gaze unwavering. Father, your own guard reports confirm that Marcos acted to help me repel the Shadowcrest attackers, risking his life in the process. He may be from another world, but he does not deserve death for a misunderstood joke, and I do not wish to be wed to someone under duress. Let us find another path. A murmur of shifting loyalties swept the hall. Some of the older nobles looked scandalized, but a handful of younger officials seemed more open-minded, exchanging contemplative glances. Jadros's gaze flicked between his daughter and Marcos, stern but thoughtful. If I grant a pardon, the law itself is called into question. That is a dangerous precedent. Marcos summoned every ounce of courage he had left. Your Majesty, the law's purpose is to uphold respect for the throne and protect your family from slander. I would never knowingly commit such an offense. Perhaps the better course is to clarify the law, to distinguish between deliberate Arcalian insults and cross-cultural misunderstandings. A hush persisted. The Emperor's expression was unreadable, but a flicker of interest might have sparked in his eyes. Suddenly, one of the high-ranking courtiers, a woman with elaborate metallic braids woven around her lavender scalp, stepped forward. Emperor Jadros, if the off-worlder truly acted without malicious intent, perhaps we should adjust the punishment, a demonstration of good faith, rather than immediate death or forced union. Another courtier, an older man wearing robes embroidered with planetary emblems, cleared his throat. But what if this is all an elaborate ruse? We cannot simply ignore the Shadowcrest infiltration. Weakness could embolden them. Princess Lorana straightened, her voice resonant. It is not weakness to acknowledge nuance. Condemning a man to death for a misunderstanding will give the Shadowcrest Alliance just the propaganda they need. Let Arcalia show wisdom instead of blind vengeance. Many eyes flicked to Jadros, who stood in pensive silence. Then he turned sharply toward Marcos. Very well, Earthman. You have offered an explanation that seems plausible. My daughter has vouched for you. Under normal circumstances, I might spare your life, but demand a less severe punishment. Banishment, perhaps. Marcos exhaled shakily. Banishment sounded like winning the lottery compared to beheading. But Jadros's next words made his relief stall. Yet this fiasco has escalated into an internal threat against the throne. The Shadowcrest conspirators point to your presence as a sign of instability. To maintain order and show that Arcalia does not cower before conspirators, I propose a challenge. One that will test the sincerity of your claim that humor, not contempt, brought you here. Marcos's brow furrowed. A challenge? A faint ripple of excitement stirred among the courtiers. Jadros lifted his chin, regal posture unwavering. Yes, you claim that your comedic approach to authority is not an insult, but a cultural norm. Prove it by making the royal court laugh, deliberately and respectfully. If you succeed, we shall count your earlier words as harmless jesting, an unfortunate cultural misunderstanding. Your life will be spared. The emperor let the final word linger, then added, but if you fail, if your attempt at humor is found wanting or insulting, then the penalty will stand as tradition demands. You will either face execution or agree to wed Laurana by day's end. A ripple of astonishment swept through the room. Marcos's stomach twisted. He glanced at Laurana, who looked just as stunned by this decree. I have to perform a comedy act for alien royalty to save my life? His mind spun with the sheer absurdity of it. Your Majesty, he ventured hesitantly, humor can be subjective. And yet we shall see whether your Earth methods can bridge that gap. Jadros interrupted, his tone final. Prepare yourself. We convene again in 1 hour. Fail, and the consequences are clear. The Emperor returned to his throne, and the court erupted in subdued chatter. Marcos felt a dozen eyes on him, some curious, others predatory, as though waiting to watch him crash and burn. He'd gone from accidental bridegroom-to-be to stand-up comedian on an alien stage. As insane as it sounded, it might be his best chance. In the antechamber adjoining the throne room, Laurana paced like a caged tigress, eyes glittering with tension. I can't believe he's making you do this, she muttered, raking a hand through her silky hair. Comedy is not a simple matter in Arcalia. Our sense of humor is layered with centuries of tradition and rhetorical nuance. What if their reaction is subdued, or they take offense to some Earth reference they don't understand? Marcos leaned against a polished marble pillar, trying to project confidence he didn't feel. His heart hammered uncomfortably against his ribs. Honestly, it's a coin toss, but it's better than a guaranteed death sentence. I'll just have to adapt my routine. Improvise. Astrolinks padded into the antechamber, its starry form flickering. The court is abuzz with speculation, Earthmen. Some see your upcoming performance as a triviality, others as a grave test of Arcalian tolerance. A few are intrigued. Princess, you should know that certain factions are gathering near the hall, possibly allied with Shadowcrest. They might attempt to sabotage the performance or provoke you. Marcos grimaced. Because a bunch of assassins wasn't bad enough? Laurana steadied herself, her voice filled with determination. I'll stand by you during this. Let them try something. My personal guards are on full alert. Astrolinks ensure no unauthorized entry into the performance area. The feline bobbed its head. At once, Your Highness, it said, then vanished in a swirl of cosmic sparks. A faint smile tugged at Marcos's lips despite the looming dread. I guess I'd better figure out some jokes that translate well. If I rely too heavily on Earth pop culture, they'll be lost. I need more universal humor, something that Arcalians can relate to. He stepped to a small table, found a data pad, and began scribbling bullet points. Laurana watched, occasionally interjecting. Avoid direct references to monarchy or oversimplifying their customs. Many are proud of our advanced society. They won't appreciate a perspective that portrays them as backward or too alien. Perhaps self-deprecating humor will work best. Point out your own flaws, your confusion upon first arriving. Marcos nodded, the seeds of a routine forming in his mind. He recalled the swirling architecture, the bizarre quantum statues, the shimmering sky bridges, the insectoid diplomats sipping wine with mandibles. Leaning into his confusion and culture shock might be a goldmine for jokes, provided he framed it with genuine admiration rather than mockery. And definitely mention your comedic roasts at Earth gatherings, Lorana added, scanning the notes. We want them to see that comedic commentary can be an act of engagement, not disrespect. A palace attendant appeared in the doorway, bowing hastily. Princess, Earthman, the court is reconvening. Marcos's nerves spiked. 1 hour felt like nothing, yet it was all he'd been given. He glanced at Lorana. Ready or not, here goes everything. She touched his arm gently, her skin radiating a soft, calming warmth. Marcos, no matter how this ends, thank you for trying. And for what it's worth, I believe Arcalia needs a lesson in humility. Maybe your humor will do just that. He offered a shaky grin. Let's just hope they laugh with me, not at me, or worse, not at all. When Marcos stepped onto the polished dais in the throne room, an expectant hush fell. The entire royal court assembled in a semicircle around the central area, reminiscent of an ancient amphitheater. Emperor Gadraos occupied the highest vantage, flanked by Lorana and a cadre of Gaillards. The overhead crystals hummed with soft light, a deliberate choice to set the stage for his performance. Marcos swallowed hard, heart thudding in his ears. He cleared his throat, voice echoing in the expansive chamber. People of Arcalia, thank you for granting me this chance to speak. My goal is simple. I want to show you that humor can be an expression of awe, not insolence, an attempt to connect across cultures, not to belittle them. He took a breath, launching into his set. When I first arrived here, I thought I was hallucinating. You have these sky bridges made of pure light, giant crystal statues discussing quantum mechanics. On Earth, that's usually something we read about in our most imaginative sci-fi novels, or see in, well, comedic parodies. A faint chuckle rippled from a corner of the court, possibly from the younger officials who were more open to novelty. Marcos pressed on, voice finding a steadier rhythm. I met insectoid beings wearing impeccable suits, sipping wine through mandibles. On Earth, we can't even get our ties straight without complaining. I remember thinking, these aliens have more class in their exoskeletons than I have in my entire closet. That earned a broader rumble of amusement. The insectoid diplomats in attendance stirred, some fluttering their antennae. One of them clicked in a gesture that might have been a laugh. Marcos sensed the tension in the room easing, if only slightly. Emboldened, he continued, then I encountered your princess, the embodiment of regal grace, tall, poised, glowing like a living constellation. Meanwhile, I was staggering around, reeking of cheap earth whiskey and cosmic hangover. If you'd heard the mess in my head, you'd realize I can't possibly look down on anyone here. I can barely keep my own dignity intact. Scattered laughter rippled again, mingled with a few approving nods. Marcos glanced at Emperor Jadros, whose face remained impassive, though he seemed to be listening intently. Lorana, standing at his side, offered a subtle, supportive tilt of her chin. Marcos pivoted to self-deprecation, spinning a story about how he'd tried to toss a piece of furniture at the force field window in the palace cell, only to have it bounce back, nearly knocking him unconscious. The court chuckled more openly now, some nodding as though they could visualize his comical panic. He layered in the comedic roast from Earth, explaining how he once saw a lowly comedian poke fun at the planet's highest officials, who in turn laughed along. Back home, he said, we don't see humor as a sign of disrespect, but as a shared release, acknowledging our imperfections and forging a unique bond. The momentum built, culminating in a lighthearted, affectionate tribute to Lorana. And if I momentarily teased the princess about her regal glow, it was because I was dazzled, like someone stumbling into a grand cosmic opera in pajamas. When faced with that much splendor, sometimes the only response is a nervous joke. The throne room was noticeably lighter now, tension melting away. By the time he finished, An undercurrent of genuine amusement filled the space. Marcos bowed his head, heart pounding. He'd done everything he could, leaving the next moment in the Emperor's hands. A lull followed. Then, unexpectedly, Emperor Jadros rose. For a dreadful second, Marcos thought he saw disapproval in the Emperor's expression. But the older man's stern features softened, just enough that a small, wry smile curved his lips. I see you have some talent for weaving humor from the threads of humility. A wave of relief swept Marcos's body, leaving him lightheaded. He didn't dare speak, letting the Emperor continue. Very well, Off-Worlder. You have made this court laugh. If your earlier words were truly in this spirit, then we cannot claim they were intended as grave insult. He paused, glancing at Lorana, who kept her composure but radiated quiet triumph. In the interest of justice, and to deny the Shadowcrest Alliance their inflammatory narrative, I hereby rescind the immediate penalty of execution. The forced marriage stipulation is also lifted. A collective exhale rushed across the throne room. Marcos nearly sagged in relief, but then Jadros lifted a finger. However, your presence in Arcalia remains controversial. It would be wise for you to remain under royal protection and that of my daughter until we have neutralized the threat of Shadowcrest. Should you choose to leave, we can arrange a formal departure. Should you choose to stay, well, that is another matter entirely. Marcos dared a glance at Lorana. Her eyes glimmered with more than just relief. There was an undercurrent of possibility he could have. Author's note: this epilogue is included in paragraph 7 to conclude the story in the requested format. The news spread quickly through Arcalia. The Earthman who nearly faced execution had won the court's approval by making the Emperor laugh. Reactions ranged from baffled admiration to political outrage, especially among the Shadowcrest conspirators, who found their narrative of dangerous off-worlder unraveled by a handful of jokes. Within days, additional attempts on Marcos's life were foiled by Lorana's loyal guards, and the conspirators' network was exposed. Though tensions simmered, the immediate crisis eased enough to allow genuine dialogue between Earth and Arcalia for the first time in history. Marcos spent the ensuing weeks at Lorana's side, learning about her engineering breakthroughs and occasionally assisting in the lab, though assisting often meant handing her tools while she performed mind-bending feats of quantum manipulation. In return, she indulged his fascination with her world, escorting him through Arcalia's floating gardens and kaleidoscopic markets. They discovered a shared spark of curiosity that bridged the gap between Earth's grounded practicality and Arcalia's transcendent innovation. Dean maintained contact from Earth, coordinating an unprecedented cultural exchange. Soon, comedic programs from Earth went viral in certain pockets of Arcalian society. A faction of progressive nobles actually championed comedic salons as a way to diffuse tension and foster community, an idea that would have been unthinkable mere months before. Meanwhile, the Emperor, though still formal and guarded, tolerated these changes with cautious acceptance. He had witnessed firsthand how humor could unite rather than divide, and how flexibility sometimes serves strength better than rigidity. Inevitably, the question of marriage reappeared, not as a death sentence, but as a genuine possibility between two individuals who had walked the tightrope of cosmic misunderstanding and come out together. Lorana wrestled with the demands of her station, her father's expectations, and her own blossoming feelings for the Earthman who'd saved her life, figuratively and literally. Marcos, for his part, was torn between returning to Earth, where he could tell the story of a lifetime, and staying in Arcalia, forging a new path in a realm that accepted him as both comedic envoy and a valued ally in science. When Emperor Jadros, in a more private moment, gently suggested that a union might further stabilize the kingdom, and quashed any illusions about forced marriages by clarifying it was their choice now, not the law's, Marcos and Lorana found themselves sharing uncertain smiles. They were, after all, an unlikely pair, a humble earth worker who'd yearned for the stars, and a brilliant alien princess who lived among them, both tangled up in a comedic cosmic misstep that had turned into something far deeper than either could have guessed. In the end, the path they chose was their own, whether it led to a wedding that spanned galaxies, or a partnership focused on bridging Earth and Arcalia's technologies, or both, was a decision they made not out of coercion, but out of affection and respect. And that, in a galaxy rife with ancient codes and political storms, was the most unexpected and remarkable outcome of all. Looking back on this wild odyssey, it's clear one impulsive joke changed everything. What began as a catastrophic slip of the tongue became a bridge between two worlds, uniting an unassuming Earthman with a visionary alien princess. Together, they proved that humor can spark new friendships, that technological wonders can shine brighter when shared, and that even the oldest laws can bend for understanding and respect. From facing down assassins to improvising cosmic stand-up, our hero transformed adversity into possibility. In the end, this story is a testament to finding hope in the most bizarre circumstances and realizing that sometimes all it takes is one brave step or one daring quip to change your destiny. What do you think of their journey? We'd love to hear your thoughts, theories, and favorite moments. Drop a comment below, share your perspectives, and join the conversation. After all, in a universe as big and surprising as this one, discussion is what keeps the adventure alive.